What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. This is TWA Motorsports, and today, yes, we are working on the Buick, and I've been telling you guys for a long time that it needed brakes, and so that is what we are going to do today. I'm also going to rotate the tires, but since I've got the wheels off to change the brakes, that's not a big deal. I've got everything I need right here, and believe it or not, so as you guys know, I've used power stop brakes like on my Trans Am. I just put a set of pads on this, and obviously they're on my old 52 and my Sierra. So I'm a pretty big fan of power stop brakes. They've always worked great for me, never had any issues. So when it came to replacing the Buick brakes, while I don't care to have performance brakes, I just want a replacement set, Power Stop actually makes that. So I will list all this stuff down below. I've got new rotors and new pads to go on this thing, and instead of trying to have those turned and dealing with that, it was just cheaper, honestly, to buy this whole kit. I think this whole thing was like $150, and that's brakes for all the way around. So we're going to get this thing off the ground, and I'm going to kind of show you guys a step-by-step process. Now, like I know some of you are thinking, it's not a huge performance piece like we normally do, or anything fun like lowering or making things faster, but it's a daily driver that we use a lot, and I've been wanting to sell it, and I just don't feel right selling it with the brakes that are on it. They've needed to be replaced for quite a while. So I'm just one of those guys. I'm an honest person when I go to sell something, so I want it to be 100%, and so we're getting very close to selling this thing, and I want to put new brakes on. So anyway, I'm going to grab my jack and some jack stands. We're going to get this thing off the ground. I'm probably going to take all four off. Normally I would just do the fronts and then move to the back, but I think I'm going to, since I'm rotating the wheels and tires, I think I'll get all of them off at one time, and let's get started. So I wanted to show you guys where I put the jack stands, because there's not a great place, there's not a big frame here that you can put jack stands against. So I chose to go in between these two mounts here. It's a pretty sturdy piece of metal. This is pretty flimsy, even though, like, if you take it to a shop, that's probably where they're going to lift it. I just think it's a little thin to be putting a jack stand there. So in the back, there's also a bar that runs in between. You can see it goes over the top there, and I'm supporting it on it. Now that's thicker than anything else that I could find. You can also put it here. I just don't like, because the it's not flat. Your jack stand's really not setting nice and evenly, so I like it to set nice and even, so it's nice and sturdy. And where I lift points, guys, I used there's a channel that goes around the exhaust. I actually used the corner of that with my jack, and it's sturdy enough to lift right there, because there's no rear end, obviously. And then in the front, I'm able to, there's a cross member right behind the motor, and my jack is actually long enough to get to that. So those are the two jacking points, and that's where I put my jack stands. So now that we know that, let's go ahead and get these wheels off and get started on these brakes. So I'm going to be using an impact to take these off. If you're not going to be using an impact, guys, you need to make sure that you loosen these up before you lift this thing up. Obviously they're going to spin if you don't. It is a 3/4 inch if it's the stock lug nut. Generally they are. Not a lot of people put aftermarket stuff on these, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead and knock all the wheels off and get them out of the way. Now that we have all the wheels off, we're going to start up here in the front. So these are, I've already loosened them, but these are 13 millimeters, and that takes your caliper off here. And then the caliper bracket itself are 15 millimeters, and they're back here in the back. Now, chances are, when you're doing this, I'm going to set the camera down, it's going to make some noise here, but what I like to do, guys, is put this on a closed-in wrench and then tap it with a mallet to loosen those up. Generally, these guys aren't that tight. Now, for the 15 on the inside, they're always tight. So what I like to do is use a breakover bar. I can't get enough leverage on my ratchet to get those loose, so I'm going to grab my breakover bar and we'll bust those loose. But I'm going to take these completely out, get this out of the way, and then I'm going to grab something to hang it up top here so we're not putting a ton of pressure on the brake line. Now that we've got the caliper hanging up here, we need to go ahead and loosen those bolts. And like I said, a breakover bar sure makes things a lot easier. You probably could do it without a breakover bar, but man, it's definitely easier with it. Once you get them loose though, you can switch over to your ratchet and go ahead and take these 15s out. And then we'll have the actual bracket out of the way. We can work on getting the rotor off next. Now that we've got the caliper completely out of the way in the bracket, we need to take this T30 out. And guys, sometimes this thing is pretty rusty, so hopefully, oh, we got lucky. If the person that changed it before really drove this down, sometimes they rust in place or they get stuck, and I absolutely hate these things. I've had to drill them out in the past. If you do have to drill them out, it's just a little added time on your day. Once we get this out, we'll be able to get the rotor off. And now we'll go grab some new parts and see if we can get this thing back together. So we have the new rotor here, and I'm going to go ahead and set it into place. Now the cool thing about these is they're not drilled or slotted, so there's not a specific direction that they go. Obviously there's front and back, but the fronts are bigger and they have the vanes in them. The back do not have vanes. So you need to make sure that you line up this hole, and there's a couple different spots that you could technically put it, as you can see. So if one doesn't line up, just use the other. And I am going to spray this down, but I figured it'd be easier if I could just spin it by hand. I'm not even putting it in the right spot here. I could spin it by hand and wipe it off once I get it on the car. So we'll go ahead and run this thing down. I think these are original brakes. This thing has about 130,000 miles on it, and it looks to be the original brakes. They're pretty rusty, that's for sure. And when we're tightening this down, guys, not tight at all, just snug. This basically just keeps things aligned. They've kind of gone away from the snap rings, or the little rings they used to put on these to keep them in place, and a majority of brakes have gone to this now. So nice and snug. Now we need to work on replacing our old hardware. So it will come with new hardware, and you can see this is all nasty and gross, and so you want to make sure, if it doesn't come with hardware, you want to clean up your old stuff with maybe a wire brush or whatnot. And actually these are not factory brakes. Look, they're Select, so they have been replaced, probably with junk. I'm not a big fan of those brakes. Anywho, let's pop this old hardware out of place. And I always like to keep it, because if your new hardware doesn't fit, you may have to clean this up anyway. Sometimes that happens, it gets in the wrong box. The other thing you want to look at is our slides, and they're in really good shape. We may take those out and put a little more grease on them. We'll see if it come with new boots. If it did, we'll take them out. If not, I think those feel really, really good, so I think I may leave them. So before I actually do anything else, as far as putting the new hardware in, I'm going to use one of my old brake pads to compress these pistons back in place, because I don't want to be messing with that when I'm ready to put it on. So what I'm going to do, if there was a single piston, you can just go in the center, but a lot of times if you push one in, the other one comes out. So what I'm going to use is a pair of these pliers and get them adjusted out as far as I need. And like I said, I'm using an old brake pad. just to press these back into place. And there we have back in where it needs to be. Now we can go on to putting that new hardware in. And it does look like it came with the correct hardware. If I could figure out how it goes in here. There we go. Looks like it fits right. Yeah. Put the other side in. And then before I put this into place, I'm actually going to put a little bit of caliper grease on these slide points here. So where the brake pad actually slides, I'm going to go grab some caliper grease and we'll get those greased up before we actually bolt this back to the car. So these are the areas that I'm talking about. And I know I talked to you guys about these boots. It didn't come with new boots. Normally, if this thing were really seized up or rusty, I would probably take those off and put a little grease on those slides, but they're really moving good. But you can take these boots off. They just come off, this pin slides out, and you can put that caliper grease on that as well. But before we go back on with this, I do want to clean this rotor face off with some brake clean, just to get any grease or anything they shipped it with. And like I said, I did that. I wanted to wait to do that so I could just spin it. It's just easier than doing it in my lap or on a table. And you can see there is stuff on there, old casting material. We'll do the back as well. Now we're ready to bolt this thing on. And you can go ahead and put your brake pads in if you'd like. We may go ahead and do that while we've got it apart. Sometimes they like to stay in, sometimes they don't. And that way, if they do, it does make it a little easier so you don't have to reach behind trying to look. Now you can turn this, which I probably should have done. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and slide the brake pads in. If I can get them open here. And they look to all be the same. So sometimes you have your guide that tells you, or your pad wear indicator that squeaks up against the rotor when they get down to the bottom, but this actually has it on both sides, so no issues with getting one in one side and one the other. Sorry guys, my camera went dead on me. Anyway, I was able to get the back one in, and so I'm going to put a little caliper grease on it, the back side of it as well. And then we'll go ahead and get it into place, and then the front one I'll just put in after we get this snugged down a little bit. So now we're ready to put our 15mm bolts back in the back. And then once we get those snug down, we can go ahead and put our front brake pad in. A ratcheting wrench does come in handy, that's for sure. Now some people put Loctite on those. You can if you'd like. I've obviously chosen not to. It didn't look like it had any from the factory, but if it makes you feel more comfortable, you can put some on there. Now we'll torque those here in just 1 second, but before I do want to go ahead and put our other brake pad in. And guys, I'll obviously make sure that the friction material is facing the rotor. I know that sounds crazy, but I've put them on backwards before. And I'm going to put a little bit of caliper grease on the inside here. So as opposed to trying to rub it on the pad, I'm going to put it on the inside of here. I don't know if you guys are able to see that. My camera may be in the wrong spot. So I put a little brake caliper grease on there, and now we can slide this thing back over. So now we're ready to torque these down. So the bolts that hold the bracket here, so the 15 millimeters, those go to 133 foot-pounds, and then the little slide bolts go to 27. Now this is if your car is a V6 car. The V8 cars are a little different, so just make sure that if you're going by these specs, it is a V6 car. So 133 on the 15s and 27 on the slide bolts. That's not very much. 27 is very little on those. So now we're ready to put the wheel back into place on this side, and then we'll move on. I already did the other side. I was doing that back and forth, just showing you guys one side because it's identical on the other side. But now we'll get the wheel on, and obviously I'm going to be rotating them, so I'll put, I'll rotate the wheels around and tires, but let's move on to the back. So now onto the back, and the slide bolts are actually 14, and the caliper bolts, the bracket here, they're still 15, but for some reason 14 in the rear and 13 in the front. And so what I like to do, like I said, is put the box end on and then just tap it with the mallet, and that generally loosens it up when the wrench falls off. We'll get these out of the way, and we'll get the caliper up here hanging somewhere. I'm not real sure where I'm going to hang it, but try to put it somewhere up top here. Now this one does have the emergency brake on it, so it's not going to move quite as much as the one up front. So we may be limited on where we can put it. Oh no, we can hang it somewhere. And we may not need to. We may just... Actually, we don't need to. I'm just going to put it there for now. We don't need to hang it at all. Now we can get those 15 millimeters out, and that'll probably take a breakover bar just like it did in the front. So these things are ridiculously tight the entire way, but once you get them broke loose, you do have the ability to get them out with a regular ratchet. Hopefully this isn't rusted. I tell you guys, we've gotten really lucky on that. As rusty as these brakes look, those things generally are pretty snug. You either break a bit or you round off the inside. I may have to go grab a mallet. There we go. And the old one is off. So in order to compress these, they're a little bit different than the fronts, and the fact that you don't actually press them in, you spin them in. A lot of the ones that have the e-brake built into the actual caliper itself are like that. So you do have to have a specialty tool in order to do that. It's relatively cheap, and I'll list it down in the description below, but I'm going to go grab that. We're going to spin this thing down into place, and then we'll start reassembling. So this is what that tool looks like, and it's got several settings just based on what car you're using. You'll just have to make sure that the fitment's good. But once we get the fitment we want, I think that I've got it. We put this in the center, and I don't have it on the right fitment. No, that's not the right one. There's several to test. This one looks like it'll work. The downside is there's nothing to hold it against while you're doing it. So once you get it past the initial tight point, that was the issue I was having. It goes in relatively easy at that point. We're going to go ahead and spin it as far down as we can to give us ample room to put the new brake in. May have to go get a longer extension here, but maybe not. Almost there. I'm going to call that good. I think we'll be able to get the new brake in there with it that far in. So now we're ready to get the new rotor into place. I'm going to go grab the new rotor, and we'll get it on here and get that T30 back in. We got the new caliper, or the new rotor, and it does need to go. I guess I can move this back a little. It does go a certain direction. You can see our spot for our keeper. I'm going to do the same, put a little WD-40 on that to keep it from getting all froze up. And this, if you guys want to know, gets torqued to 106 inch-pounds, but I'm just getting it snug. I wouldn't even call it tight. 106 inch-pounds is, you can barely hear that with an inch-pound wrench. Well, now I'm going to go ahead and spray this thing down. Wipe it down a little on both sides. Now we are ready to reassemble the rest of this, and I will tell you guys that on this one I am going to pull, so these pads are completely gone in the back. Look at this, completely gone. On this one, if you notice, it probably broke off, but I think it did. Well, never mind. I think there was a indicator on this one that's just completely snapped off because it was so far gone. So we're going to pull all this old hardware off, and I am going to pull these apart. They feel really dry, so I'm going to grab some of my grease, and we'll re-grease those and then snap them back into place before we put this bracket back on. So I'm just gonna put quite a bit on here, and if they're rusty you can take them out and use either an emery cloth or some steel wool or whatever you feel comfortable or have around. I've had to do that in the past when they're completely seized up. Yeah, they're pretty dry. And if your boots are torn, you do need to get some new ones, because if moisture gets in there, they will seize up. And the kit does not come with new ones. It does come with new hardware, so we need to open it up and we'll snap it into place. Just like we did in the front, I'm going to put a little here where the brake pad slides. And you can do this after you put it on, but to me it's a little easier now. And I'm going to go ahead and put the rear pad into place before we put it in, and we'll go back together. So the rear pads are a little different. So your depth gauge is on the back and there's not one on the front, so make sure that you put that the same way when you're going back together. So we're going to just snug these down, and then once we get them snug, we'll worry about torquing them at the end. These things are so tough. So actually, while I have room, I'm going to go ahead and torque these guys. The bracket itself goes to 94 foot-pounds. So a couple things, make sure after you torque those, you plug back in your ABS sensor if you unplugged it, and I think you probably need to just to have more room. Got that plugged back in. Now we're ready to put our front pad in. Now, as I said, there's no wear indicator on this side, so make sure that you get the right pad. And it is way easier to put those in like that, that's for sure. The other thing is I'm going to put a little bit of caliper grease on the face of this. And we're ready to slide it back into place. And hopefully we got that thing in there far enough, and we did. And just like the front, these need to be on the outer side, so don't pinch them underneath. Then we can go ahead and put these back into place and torque them to 25 foot-pounds. It's a little bit different than the front, not a lot. Now once you get it on the ground, go ahead and torque your wheels down. Now I'm torquing mine to 100 foot-pounds. That's just what I generally do. You can see I did clean up the wheels a little bit. But the very important thing, guys, is when you start this thing up, so before you put it in gear, you got to be very careful. You need to pump up those brakes in order for the pads to be touching the rotor. Otherwise, you're not going to have any brakes, and you're going to roll into whatever is in front of you. So be very careful. But that's what we're going to do next after I torque the wheels. I'm going to go ahead and hit all these with 100 foot-pounds, and then we'll get in and do that break-in procedure. Now I'm in the car with it running, and what we're wanting to do, guys, is we're going to push this until it feels normal. Like I said, that's going to bring those pads back to the rotors, and you'll have brakes again. So just pump them until they fill back to where they normally are, and we're going to go do that break-in procedure. Now I'm probably not going to show you guys the break-in procedure. It's on the box, but it is a 40 to 10 5 times in a row, and that's a pretty aggressive stop. And then right following that, 35 to 5, and that's a moderately aggressive stop. And then you have to drive around for about 5 minutes, not touching the brakes in order to give them time to cool. So we're gonna go do that process, and when we get back, we'll go over everything we've done and talk about how much different they feel, if they're better, if they're squeaking, if we have any issues. So guys, we're back. It was a pretty quick drive and no issues whatsoever. They felt way better. I had some shimmy in the front when I was applying some pretty hard braking, and I think that these old rotors were just warped, and yes, they definitely needed replaced. As you guys could see in the back brakes were just completely toast. And so pretty easy project, guys. Took me a little longer than I wanted because I did clean up the wheels a little bit. They definitely needed it. This poor thing has been neglected, but it's our daily driver, so we don't wash it as much as we do the cars that we love, I know, but we change oil in it and keep up with maintenance and whatnot. So it's getting close, guys. It's getting close to getting rid of this thing, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully it was informative. If it was, guys, make sure you smash that thumbs up button. And like I said, I promise I won't do all this. I won't do any more Buick stuff. I can't think of anything else that I want to do that I will show you guys. We will stick with what you're here for, which is like Trans Am, truck, SUVs, all that other stuff, the Corvette stuff, all the fun stuff that you guys want. So guys, if you're not subscribed, go down, smash that subscribe button. It really helps me out, support the channel. And while you're down there, make sure you ring that bell icon that we are notified every single time we drop a new video. And well, stay tuned to see what we work on next.